Okay, so what I want you to do, once you get your printed out self-portrait picture, we're going to try drawing it, keeping in mind the proportions that we've been practicing, okay? Now, don't panic if it doesn't go according to plan. Eventually, what we'll end up doing, you'll have the option to trace it onto your transparency. But first, in order to get to that point, I need to see that you've tried using proportions for your picture, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do, there's a couple different ways you can approach this. So one way you could approach this is by setting up a grid. So if I wanted to, I could take and mark out every inch on my paper all the way across, and then I could mark out every inch down here all the way across. And then I can connect my lines vertically. Your paper should have printed 8 inches by 10 inches, so it should divide evenly into your grid. Next, you're going to measure and add a mark every inch going down the side of your paper and on the other side of your paper. And then you're going to connect those lines to create the horizontal lines of the grid on your photograph. You will want to draw your grid lines over the entire photograph so that it is divided up evenly into sections. And then I could take my scrap paper and do the same thing. So I could take and measure out across it. Okay, here's my starting point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I could do the same thing at the bottom. Next, I measure down 10 inches and then I add another line of horizontal inch marks that go across the page every inch for 8 inches. Next, I'm going to connect my top and bottom marks to get all the vertical lines of my grid drawn out on my paper. After I have my vertical lines in place, then I measure down the sides and make a mark every inch for 10 inches. And then I do the same thing on the opposite side and I connect those to create the horizontal lines of my grid. I do this until I have all of my lines of my grid in place. Then you are going to want to label your rows and columns. So I numbered across the top of my columns and I used the alphabet to label my rows. And then I did the same thing on my picture and on my paper. So I knew exactly which square was which when I started to draw. Remember, when you're using the grid system, it helps to isolate or block off the other squares so you can look at your photo one square at a time and draw what you see within that square. Make sure that you're checking to see where the objects or lines are crossing the grid lines and try to redraw them as accurately as possible onto your gridded paper. Another way that you can draw your self-portrait is look at your proportion guide, look at your picture here. On my rough draft paper, I started by making a mark where I thought the hair would start, and then I roughed out the shape of the face. I kind of looked at how much negative space was on either side of my head to figure out the proportions that I needed for the size of the head shape. Once I got the shape of the oval started, then I went back in and I looked at my proportion guide and I blocked off where I thought the different features would go. So for example, I looked, okay, where's the halfway point? Okay, that's where my eyes would go. Where within my face would the eyes be? I needed to make sure that it was an eye wide. When I did that, I realized, oops, I made my face a little bit too wide, so I adjusted my oval shape. Once I had my eyes shapes in place, then I marked where the hair would go, which was a little bit above halfway between the eyes and the top of the head. Then I marked where the nose would be, halfway between the eyes and the chin. Then I marked where the mouth would be, a little above halfway between the nose and the chin. Once I had all my proportions in place, then I went back in and started to draw the shapes of the features that I saw. Be sure to look closely at your photograph. Make sure to include the parts of the features. Like, for example, I added the iris and the pupil and the reflection to the eye. Then I added the eyelashes, the eyelid, and then I added the eyebrow. Remember, when drawing the nose, don't forget the circle part. Look and see, can you see the nostrils or can't you? What does the base of the nose look like for its shape?
Look at your lips. Remember, if you have an open smile, it'll stretch the upper lip. Don't forget it is okay to show creases, like where you see your smile or under your eyes. It helps to make it feel more realistic. Don't forget to give your person or yourself eyebrows. Remember, you can block out the shape. Lines can have a lot of help in showing the direction of the hair or the length of the hair. Remember, you can draw the overall general shape of the hair. Remember, you can also draw like clumps of the hair, but you don't want to draw every single individual strand of the hair. So try your best. It's okay if it doesn't look perfect. I'm going to take a look to see that you've tried using one of these two techniques before you get your transparency to move on to the next step.